So we are deep into our anti-stress meditations, our relaxation ones. So we've had a couple of meditations that have helped us to relax the physical body. And the next two meditations that are coming up also have to do with releasing stress, but in different ways. So the first meditation that we're going to be doing, it's really to address our tendency towards being anxious about things or worrying about things and repatterning our thought process around that. So I think that you guys will enjoy that, even if you don't identify with having a significant anxiety disturbance. We all get anxious every once in a while. And so this is a good way to practice being aware of what the mind is doing when we get into states like that. And then having resources or practicing methods to redirect those thought processes and to engage with a different story around the experiences that we're having. So, one of the things that can often get us into states of worry or anxiety is this tendency we have to feel like we need to control everything that's going on. And, primarily with anxiety, we're talking about dynamics that are happening within us that have to do with the present moment and future outcomes. Anxiety, worry, that kind of stress usually is more related to us anticipating things, like we're in stories anticipating what's going on. And oftentimes when we feel like we're not in control, that can cause feelings of anxiety to arise in a lot of people. So that's one of the things that I'm going to invite you to pay attention to the next week or so as you're working with this meditation practice, and just noticing if any of those thought patterns start to arise. Because remember, with mindfulness practices, we have the audio that you're listening to that is reminding us to pay attention during the time that we're doing the meditation. But the point is that we're training our mind to be a better observer of the processes that are going on in our mind, so that as we're going about our everyday activities, when we start going off into these paths nurturing to us that are not supportive of us living peacefully, living empowered, living with hope or a sense of direction, that we can notice when those are happening and more quickly catch ourselves and redirect. And that improves our quality of life, by being able to do that. And I don't know about you guys, but I think that at least a lot of you probably are the same as me in the sense that we tend to have a affinity for feeling like we need to be in control all the time, right? We need to control things. And there's kind of a funny thing about that idea, because when we're talking about anxiety in particular or worry, if we have feelings of anxiety that are arising in the present moment, so let's say we've gotten good at containing the mind and inviting it to be here with what's happening right now, okay? And we're not actually floating off into the past or the future. There can still be a tendency to engage with some anxious thoughts or sometimes anxious emotions that arise that have to do with feeling like we're not able to control the current situation, right? So we can probably all think of situations in which we've had this experience. Usually it's when we're interacting with somebody else that has their own mind and their own idea about things, right? And if we have this idea about how we want things to go, and we're not feeling in control of the situation, that can cause a certain degree of anxiety. The other way that we can experience anxiety is if we're anticipating a future event. So if we're thinking about something that hasn't happened yet, but that is going to happen sometime in the future, or, is likely to happen sometime in the future, we can have anxiety that arises from like worry about not being able to control the outcome. I mean, that makes sense, because if we were confident that everything was going to turn out exactly how we wanted it to, we wouldn't have anxiety, right? Right? So the funny thing about that way of thinking about our life is that oftentimes, while it's important to act appropriately situationally, we don't actually, if we're going to take this down to another level, we don't actually control things the way that we think we control things. And that causes a problem for us. Because, and if you pay attention to this, you will start to notice that this is true and how it's true. We do things because we think that what we do controls the situation in a certain way, right? I mean, that's how we make decisions that seem logical. The thing is this: if we really controlled things the way that we think we do, or the way that we're trying to, we would have a predictable outcome, right? So it would work 100% of the time. So there are other things at play that either we don't have the capacity to directly influence, or the way that we're interacting with the situation is being influenced by us in a different way than we think it is. So that's something that you're just going to have to grok for a little while. But I'm going to offer you this level, because we can take this on a lot of different levels, right? We can take this on a very physical level, where we're taking a physical action and then we get a physical response. When we're dealing with other people, the unknown factor there is the other person and how they're going to choose to respond, right? And for the most part, on a very fundamental, basic level, we believe that the things we say should have an influence on, the outcome of the situation. And other people don't necessarily always have the same belief systems that we do. They don't have always even the same value system. And they very often don't have the same perspective, right? There are many different perspectives in every situation. So if we find ourselves in a situation that our words don't seem to be causing the desired outcome, what else can we do? What else can we do? So then we can start to telescope out, or maybe microscope in, whichever way you want to think about it, to the next layer of reality, which is energetic. So oftentimes when we hear people talking about mindfulness practices, it's on a very mundane kind of physical world level that has to do with our actual thoughts. And even though you could argue that thoughts aren't physical, they're sort of very closely related to our physical existence in a certain way. If we go down another level to the energy, we can begin to appreciate why practices that help us to relax, to get out of a stress response state, to connect with peace on the inside so that we're calm, can have actually a much bigger influence on our things that we're experiencing, the way that we're interacting with the world, than even the words that we're saying, right? So we've all experienced this too. So if you're with somebody that calm, sometimes we'll say they're able to hold space for people, right? What do we mean by that? We usually mean something like these people are not reactive, and they're able to maintain a certain state of being regardless of what's going on around them. So if we're able to cultivate peace within ourselves, then we're actually able to have a much bigger influence at a different level on the immediate circumstances, okay, in the present moment. Because anything that you say, so you can think of it like this. Let's say you are in a conversation with somebody, and maybe it's kind of like a tense conversation, or there's a little bit of tension or disagreement or even argument or fighting. If we are in a really ramped up state and we're very reactive, not only is it more difficult for us to respond, okay, rather than reacting from our habituated programs, but when we are able to pause and respond using different words, okay, if we have the energy of, I hate you, right, behind the words that we're saying, or I'm angry, or I'm anxious even, the words that we say carry a particular influence on the situation. Whereas if you would say those same words from a place of peacefulness and being centered and being calm, the way that the other person is likely to receive that is probably going to be different, right? I mean, we all know that. So that's something that I want you guys to also be aware of and start to play with as we're doing these meditation practices this year. Because while in mindfulness practices, we're working with the mind, okay, which is why they're called mindfulness, we're also working with awareness, which is ultimately what mindfulness means, is just to be aware. But by using this process, what we're really doing is we're training ourselves how to disengage from our habitual programs that are driving reactions that are not serving us. They're not serving others, and they're really not serving the greater good in the bigger picture of things. If we can disengage from those reactionary responses, those unhelpful thought patterns, it's going to be easier for us to be in a place of stillness and to be present in the moment with the people that we're interacting with, so that we can change the dynamic that's going on in our environment merely by the state of our being. Right? That makes sense to you guys. I don't think that's a new idea for any of you. The challenge is that it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that, especially when we're triggered, right? So that's why there are lots of different tools that we have. So in this program, we're talking about how to use the mind to fix the mind, essentially. And in the other things that we're doing, I know a lot of you have, like Valerie, you were talking about getting the life activation, and Trish, you did Empower Thyself. Then there are other tools that we can use to bring that into our life, so that that's working on a different level. It's sort of working on the level of our etheric blueprint to help clear some of these triggers that we have, or these old patterns, in a different way that doesn't require you to psychologically process them or to think about them. And that's why a lot of times when people get these etheric healings or these hermetic healings, because I experienced this myself, there are certain tendencies that I had been working really hard to control or to clear for a long time that just went away. And I didn't really have a way to explain that. Okay. But it's still important for us to train our minds because our thoughts are really busy. And most of us haven't gotten to the point yet where our mind is quiet because our thoughts really are not usually, I'm going to be careful when I say this. Our thoughts usually aren't helpful to us. And I know that people will argue about that because we can argue, well, sometimes I have positive thoughts, right? I can tell myself positive stories and those make me feel good or they help to redirect me. And sure, that's true. But ultimately, if we're going to push ourselves, because you remember I promised you guys that we're going to try to take some of these practices to more subtle levels, okay? When we're working with mindfulness practices that are having us explore what it feels like to try to engage with the experience of having a quiet mind, which means there are no thoughts that are distracting us from the present moment. That actually would be a more ideal state for us to be in because the mind often will distract us and it runs on stories. So in a perfect world, and there are meditations that exist where you sort of practice getting into the void, it's called. So the max meditation that I was talking about before we started the recording here, that specifically is to help us get into the void, if you think about it that way. And those of you that have done the astral travel class, when we learn to astral travel, that's also teaching you a safe and energetically safe way to get into this place that we sometimes will call the void, which is just a quiet place where your mind is still and then you can just receive in the present moment. And so, that's a big shift to get from the state that we're normally operating in when we're in our everyday life and we're at work and we're talking with people. But with practice, it is possible to, and this is why meditation is so important, practice, because you have to be able to first access that state when you're sitting in meditation. And then ideally, ultimately, the goal is to be able to bring that state of being into your everyday life more and more often so that you are navigating your life, okay, in this little body that we're driving around. And we're watching everything that's happening. And then we're engaging with our awareness. We can respond from a pure place. So you could say we're responding from our divine self that really doesn't need to use a lot of stories. It just does what's right. Can you imagine that a little bit? Yeah. Yeah. So we don't need all the words. We don't need all the words. I mean, we operate that way because that's what we're used to and that's what's accessible to us. And that's part of our structure right now. In Empower Thyself, we kind of talk about that as the negative ego and the positive ego. But the positive ego can still be a little bit chatty. And so if we're able to get very, very quiet and enter this void place, we're really able to be in a space of receiving. So what would it be like in every situation for you to just know what the right thing to do is? It would be amazing, right? It would be amazing to not have doubt. And we need to be able to get quiet in order to get closer and closer to being in that space so that we can connect with divinity, connect with the mind of God, if you want to talk about it that way. And we need to meditate in order to do that. I'm here to tell you. So if you would like to get to that place, meditation is a necessary piece of that for most people on the planet. And the way that kind of pie in the sky idea wraps into our meditation to relieve anxiety is that if the mind were quiet, we wouldn't actually be worried about what was going to happen. We would just know, we would just act according to the best thing that we have available to us at the moment, and we would trust. We would trust that everything's going to be okay. And one of the things that we're going to get to, and I'm trying to remember if I think this is in the next meditation that's coming up, is one of the phrases that we can work with is this phrase that is like this: tough things have happened before, and I got through it, and this is going to be okay too, right? Everything's going to be okay. I'm just going to do the best thing that I can do. And when we start to choose different inner dialogue, the reason that can be helpful for us is we can choose phrases that help us to let go of attachment to the outcome of things. So any of you guys that have studied yoga, this is like a big thing in the yogic philosophy, right? Is our attachments cause all of our suffering, right? Because you get attached to things. And as far as anxiety goes, there is an aspect of attachment to that because we're attached to the outcome of our actions. So you can call that, I want to be in control, right? Because we're trying to control things to get to a certain outcome. But ultimately, beneath that is that we're attached to an outcome. So what would it be like to just be able to do the right thing to the best of your understanding at the time, right? And then as we grow and we learn more and we understand more, then we can do better. But right now, what if you could just act in the best way that's available to you and not worry about the outcome of that? Not be attached to what the other person says in response to what you say, for example. Not to be attached to how somebody else is going to respond. You just do what you know to be right and then let go. Because that's really the extent of what you have control over. And if we can get to the point where we're able to do that, that in and of itself will bring us into a state of greater peace. Because we have peace knowing that we're living in alignment with our values and what we understand to be good and right and kind and compassionate and all of those things. And sometimes what aligns with that is not necessarily soft. I mean, sometimes we need to be firm. We need to be direct. We need to take a specific action. But if we're able to be in alignment within ourselves and we are able to act in a way that we know is good to the best of our understanding, we'll have peace on the inside, right? And then we can let go of what happens because of it, because we'll know I've done the best that I can in this situation, and that's all that I can do. And what other people do is up to other people, okay? And I don't need to worry about that. That's for them to think about. So that's one level. The other level is when we're in alignment with our ethics and our morals and what we understand to be right, good, in alignment with the divine will. Every time that we act in alignment with that, we're adding that energy to the collective consciousness. In quantum physics, they even say that there's like one mind. So we're all little individuations, but there is a connection that we have to each other through this field of consciousness, you could say. So sometimes people will call that the collective consciousness. Every time we act in accordance with what's right, we are adding that goodness to the collective. And that has an influence. And it has an influence that you might not experience the result of right away. So that's why it's so important to understand how we control things and how we don't control things. And sometimes the benefit of our action in alignment with what we know to be right isn't something that we're going to experience right in the present moment, but it's still having a positive effect. And I think that there's a lot of hope that we can glean from that, right? And a lot of empowerment that we can have when we understand that we're making a positive difference. You know, every effort that we put into acting in alignment with what is good and right is having an influence. And so we just have to keep going. We just have to keep doing what we can do and let go of the apparent results of those actions at a certain level. And when we can let go of attachment to the outcome of the things that we're doing, understanding that good will send good, right? This energy of good, only something good can come from that. Only something good can come from that. Because things don't always happen right away. So I think that that's a really empowering thing to remember, especially when we're in, I mean, I know some of us are in kind of challenging situations, and that's something that can be really helpful to come back to and just to not overthink things so much. So this first meditation is really about how to not overthink. Be kind of helpful, right? Stop overthinking things so much. The second meditation that's going to be coming up is really about taking charge of your busy mind in order to make it work for you, for your benefit, and moving from anxiety into relaxation. So that's sort of the theme that we're working with in the next couple of weeks. And awareness is a really big key for that. So you'll notice that we're practicing becoming aware of the thoughts and then controlling them or redirecting them. Also, awareness of the physical body, sensations that we're feeling in the physical body, and awareness of our emotions if there are emotions that are coming up. And it's just important to understand our baseline, because then you can, it's nice too. I don't know how many of you are doing this, but if you have meditations and you journal afterwards, you can write down your experiences, because that can sometimes bring helpful insights as to where would be good for you to focus your energies and how to bring that into your day. You know, one of the practices that we used to do many, many years ago when I was studying Buddhism and teaching Buddhism and stuff like that, is we had something called the book. So we had vows that we had taken. So, we all have like rules of conduct. So, if you're connected with Christianity, we have the 10 Commandments, so you could use those. But any kind of rules to guide your behavior. And we would write these down in the book, and then periodically throughout the day, every couple hours or so, we would have a little chime go off on our phone, and then we would check in, okay, how am I doing on this one? And the next 2 hours, the chime would go off, and it would be the next one down the list, right? So it's a way for you to continually check in with yourself during the day. So I'm not suggesting that you guys do that. However, if there's something that you notice is a recurring pattern for you that you'd like to work on, for example, that you're noticing is coming up for you in meditation, you might decide that that might be helpful for you, is, especially if you notice, gosh, I go like a whole week or a whole day without even noticing that I'm doing that. And then that pattern is just perpetuating itself. Then you could make a little note for yourself, or have a little book or a little alarm on your phone that will go off. And when the alarm goes off, you'll just check in with yourself and say, okay, how am I doing now? What's going on in my mind? Just so I can remember to be aware and create new habits of being aware. And then as we remind ourselves more often, and then now you guys, as we're going along, are getting tools to redirect, right? And how to work with those kinds of things. you're going to be building a toolbox of different things, and certain practices are going to be maybe more relevant to you at different times. And you can use those throughout the day. Okay.
This is Valerie. Some of the things that you said about how we are contributing to that kind of universal energy. Did I sum that up correctly?
Yeah, it's important to just remember everything we do matters. Even if other people don't seem to appreciate it, the universe does. Yeah.
Yes. And, I feel like there's never any harm. It's never wrong to add a little bit of good to the universe,
Yeah.
to the universal energy.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
That's just a really good reminder. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. Anybody else? Okay. Well, I say we sign off with that. Go forth and do good.
Thank you.